makes a good family movie? Is it the messages, the characters, just the absence of content issues? We'll try to answer those questions, and we'll probably think of a few more to ask during our conversation today. I'm Bret Eckelberry, sitting in the host chair for the Plugged In show this week, and I'm joined by my Plugged In colleagues, Paul Asay and Emily Chow. Hey, guys.
Hey.
Hey.
So before we jump into our conversation about what makes a good family movie, I'd like to hear what movies you guys watched with your families growing up. What was like the staple family movie in your household?
So this is a really tricky one because, I grew up in the dark ages, right? So you couldn't pop in a movie anytime you wanted to. You actually, if you loved a movie, you actually had to go to the theater.
Gotcha.
And see it. And my parents got sick of taking me to the movies, over and over and over again. But I did talk them into seeing Star Wars: A New Hope.
Ah, okay.
6 times in the theater. And when you grow up in Taos, New Mexico, that is no mean feat. I mean, you really have to work at that. So, yeah, that was probably like the movie that I saw the most as a child.
Okay.
Interesting.
Yeah. I just couldn't get enough of that movie.
Well, I'm jealous that you got to see it in the theater.
6 times.
Yeah.
It was
like when it first came out, though, because you could
exactly.
technically still see it in the theaters today, but it's not the same as if you were born in that era.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and it really was like one of these foundational movies, right? Because it was, I think, that was the first real huge special effects movie that you could see. You know, you sit in there, you see the spaceships going, you see the robots, you're just thinking this is the greatest thing of all time. I used to put myself to sleep by rethinking the entire story in my head until I dozed off. Usually it was somewhere right around when Uncle Owen Emperor got it, and that was pretty much
All right.
Hopefully you didn't have nightmares about that. So, Emily, what about you? What was your family movie staple?
What wasn't our family
Yeah.
staple? And we were this sort of family. We had 4 kids, so there was no way we were going to the theater 6 times to see anything. We were lucky if we went once to see something. No, we were a DVD and VHS family.
I get it.
And eventually Blu-rays as well. But so I think it just sort of depended on what we had. What we had on video, but I distinctly remember watching The Princess Bride multiple times. I remember watching, for some reason, we only had the 2 towers from the Lord of the Rings trilogy.
Okay.
Really.
So I remember watching that on repeat.
That's a very weird one to have. If
I know,
you're
we
gonna
had the
get
second one.
Yeah, the middle
just
one.
the second one.
Just
we
watch the middle.
eventually got the first and third as well, but I just really remember seeing the 2 towers a lot on repeat. And then pretty much anything done by Pixar. So Up, The Incredibles, Toy Story, A Bug's Life. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's what I remember
That's
watching
great.
growing up.
And you hit on something interesting too, because there were certain things for me as well growing up where you only had one part of like a series. And so that's just kind of all you knew. You only knew
jumping right in the middle of the story.
Or you're jumping in.
Or you just you're watching the whole series later on. You're like, why do I know this particular movie so well?
Really well.
You mean there's more to this whole series than Helm's Deep?
This makes a lot more sense when you have all the context. How about that?
I mean, I'd seen all the movies.
Yes.
That was the only one that we watched on repeat.
Yeah, no, I understand. So for me, I think, again, very similar to you, Emily. We watched a ton of DVDs, ton of VHS, Star Wars, Lord of the Rings, all sorts of stuff. I think the family movie that I'll pick is Monsters, Inc.
Yeah,
Monsters, Inc.
So I remember distinctly watching, I think I was in 5th or 6th grade, watching Monsters, Inc. in the theater with my family. And then after that, we just could not wait until it came out on DVD.
You had to see
I
it
don't
again.
think I ever saw it in theater, but I remember watching that one a lot. Because, again, Pixar.
I remember from school, I had gotten I had found a $5 bill the day before or something earlier that weekend. And then we were in this town, not our hometown, didn't have a movie theater, but we were across the way at another town, had a movie theater. And I was begging my parents, can we see Monsters, Inc.? I'll even donate my $5 so we can watch it as a family. And
so we can watch it as
they
a
were
family.
so
That is
touched
so sweet.
that they said, yes,
so we did
we'll
watch
take
it.
you.
We did watch it. We had a great time, and then we couldn't wait for it to come out on video. And I
good
remember,
investment.
Yes, good investment. I remember watching that a lot with my family growing up. All the jokes, just, having those kind of not quite inside jokes, but when you watch something as a family a lot, I'm sure we'll touch on this a little bit. You quote the lines, you tell the jokes to each other from that movie all the time as well. So yeah, it was good. So, all right, let's dive into our conversation. So last year, 2024, a lot of family-friendly films were released, and they did very well at the box office. So by my count, and according to Box Office Mojo, so Inside Out 2 was the top grossing movie of the year. At least half of the top 10 grossing movies could be considered family movies in some way. And that's not even including movies like Sonic 3 or The Wild Robot, who didn't even crack the top 10, but were pretty big animated features. So clearly family-friendly films have proven to be good business for Hollywood, but I want to know what makes a good family-friendly movie.
It's a great question, right? And I think that one of the key ingredients is that it really can be enjoyed together as a family. You have movies that are made for kids, and those are just fine. You obviously have a lot of movies made for adults that kids just wouldn't get, or you don't want them to get. And
right.
So there's that. But for me, like, the perfect family movie is one that really is able to hit like a child's sense of humor, that sense of wonder, but also bring to the table some of those elements that parents really resonate with. I have talked about The Wild Robot way, 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 way too much on this show.
Talk about it more.
I think I will, because that's a good example of a movie this year, and really Inside Out 2 is as well, where you have these moments that are really funny, really sweet. There's a lot of content within both of those movies that can resonate with kids. They'll laugh. They'll really love some of the cute characters. They'll even sort of embrace some of what's going on. But when you look at The Wild Robot and its themes of motherhood and of sacrifice and of all of those elements, it's almost made more for adults. And that's one of the reasons why when we did our Plugged In Movie Awards, we wound up putting The Wild Robot in the adult category instead of the kid category, because we just felt like the themes were so strong for parents. So that would be my thought.
There are some movies that when you turn them on, they're geared towards kids, and you're like, okay, this is a movie I can watch with my kids. And as you're watching it, there's a couple of adult jokes, and you're like, nope, I'm not doing this, because it's just like, you know what, this is too much. This is supposed to be a kids movie, and yes, these jokes are maybe going over my younger children's heads, but like, I don't want them repeating this, because it's always like it's always like that sort of thing where your child may not even understand what they're repeating, but that's the thing they latch on to, and then they're like quoting it at church and stuff, and you're like, no.
Yeah, that's awkward.
It's like, oh goodness, and you're super embarrassed. So there's that sort of film. There's a sort of film that you turn on and you're like, okay, kids movie, and you're just like, like you're just bored or annoyed or something. You're like, please be over, because you are done with it, even if your child loves it. So you're just like, ugh. And then there are other movies where you turn it on and you're really enjoying it, but your kid is like, can I go play? Mom, can we turn on something else? And it's like okay, you are killing me. Ironically, you mentioned The Wild Robot. I saw that recently with my nephew and my sister, and so they had seen it before. So I had not, though. So I was watching it. I was super engaged. And the whole time he's sitting there and he wants to watch something else. He wants to play his video games. He wants to do something else. But part of that is just his personality.
Sure,
so, you don't really think too much on it. And then the other part of it, though, was just that because it is, I think, geared slightly more towards adults.
Yeah.
Like, it's a great film and he really loved it and everything. But yeah, it was hard for him to hold his engagement the whole film upon a second viewing.
It's interesting that you mentioned that, because you do have movies that will engage kids. The first time through, you have a great time as a family. I think a lot of Pixar stuff is really built for that, right?
Yes.
You've got Up, which I think is one of my favorite movies ever, and it really does have some favorite moments for kids too. But it's not a movie that I think a lot of kids watch over and over and over again.
No.
They watch Cars, which for adults, it's one of the lowest rated Pixar movies there is, and I think it's because it just doesn't engage the adults quite as well.
Yeah.
So it's a tricky,
so true.
It's true.
tricky balancing act for that.
Oh yeah, I think it's a really hard line to walk, to be both engaging for kids and for adults as well. To have a message that is enduring enough that a kid can enjoy it when they watch it, and then as they get older, they can appreciate more of the movie as they age, right? And so it stays in the rotation of, wow, I love this movie. I want to show this to my kids, right? Because now I see the things that my parents saw, but my kids will see the things I saw as a kid and enjoy it, right?
I think that's a really interesting point, and that's one of the great things about not growing up in the dark ages like I did, where you had to actually go to movies, because you do have the ability to watch these good movies over and over again. And when you were talking about that, it reminded me of, I think, how a lot of folks, this is switching into the reading area, but how a lot of folks, as they grow into the Chronicles of Narnia, how they sort of experience it, because you read it and it's a great adventure story with really likable characters and a talking lion and this cute little mouse that has a sword and all of these elements, right? But then as you get older and as you go deeper with the stories, you start to see some of the themes in play. You start to see some of the religious themes in play. And all of a sudden it deepens your appreciation of that. And I think a really strong family movie has that ability to sort of unfold almost like a flower, where you see more and more and more in it as time goes on.
Yeah. So a lot of the family-friendly movies that we have mentioned today happen to be animated. So why do you think animated movies specifically tend to lean toward family movies?
It's a great question, and this is my own theory. I think that animated movies tend to be better family movies because they are able to deal with serious, real, emotional moments with a sincerity that it's harder to get away with when you're talking about live action. I think when I was reviewing Inside Out 2, that was one of the things that came to mind for me, was that for a movie for an adult, you have to have a certain nuance. You have to have certain ambiguities. You have to have some complexities that you might not have in some of these kids movies, where the emotions are so pure and so raw that it makes it just so much more relatable. Like, you can look at Inside Out 2, you can look at Riley and you say, I know exactly how she feels. That is exactly the way I feel. Animated movies, I think, because of the artwork, maybe, because of...
Oh, definitely because of the artwork, because, you've got these bright, colorful images that, when you're younger, they keep you engaged. You're like, this is just a fun movie, and... just kind of touching back on what you're just saying about the emotional side of things. I think the things that animated films do is they make these characters who could be very complex characters, but they make them fun and approachable and colorful. And so as a little kid, you're engaged by just what you're seeing physically on screen, and you enjoy those little funny moments. And then you go back and you continue to watch it as you get older. But as you get older, you start to understand, oh, my favorite character, there's more going on here, because there's a complexity there that we can weave into that character other than just the little fun moments, you know? And then again, as you continue to grow and you become an adult, you look back on it and you just there's a relatability there, but in a way where you're just it was communicated to you throughout your childhood. You know, it wasn't an adult coming to you and saying, here's all the facts of life that you now have to process.
Right.
No, it was like slowly and surely you grew with that movie.
Yeah.
Nothing changed about the movie. It's just that as you got older, you were still engaged by it because of, you know, the bright colors and stuff, and you loved it. You were like, this is my favorite movie. I'm going to watch it over and over and over and over. That by the time you know, were old enough to actually understand all the themes of the movie, you didn't even realize how much it had impacted you.
Yeah. I think there's also an element of caricature in these animated movies, you know, because the characters are so broad and so larger than life in a certain way. You know, I think about the Despicable Me movies, where you can see in Gru, who's the main he's the main protagonist, really.
Yes.
In the first one, he's a bad guy, and he sort of learns how to become a father. But because of the exaggerated elements of the Gru character, you know, where he's so evil and so weird.
So ridiculous in such a delightful way.
That's exactly right. You can see that movement into the idea of fatherhood and of love and of all that sort of stuff much more starkly. And I think that hits home a little bit more when you're 8 or 10 or 12.
Sure. I like your mention of kind of caricature, right? Animation can really lean into telling you a lot about the characters from a visual perspective. And I think that can really appeal to kids just in their minds, like subtly, just you talk about like character shapes and stuff. I don't know if you guys are familiar with kind of what Disney did like the big eyes and big heads if they want to have like a cute character, but they went through and did all of this kind of research, their own research, just in terms of how do people respond to these animated characters, right? Oh, they're a villain, so they need to be kind of this shape or appearance. They're a hero
Gru with his pointed nose, all that kind of stuff.
They're a hero, so they need to be like an upside down triangle, like a superhero kind of a thing, right? All of that can really speak to it. But when you speak of like kind of the raw emotions that are at like the surface level, I think we're seeing a lot of animated movies really, they may have that, but they really lean into some complex themes and emotions under the surface as well. They might present them differently than, say, like a live action movie. But it really seems like sometimes animated movies really cut to the core of something like motherhood, like The Wild Robot, right? Or death in Up. Oh my goodness.
Oh
right?
my goodness.
That opening scene in Up is, man, that's a tearjerker kind of a thing.
Well, and that movie also just kind of teaches a little bit about grief as well.
It is a very powerful movie.
And you still have a talking dog in it.
And you still have a talking dog in it.
Best of both worlds.
I think that Up actually is a perfect illustration of what you're talking about in terms of the artwork, right? You are right. There is a science behind making these characters lovable, or how we figure out what we need to think about them. Up. If you notice the characters, when you look at the main old guy, he is square, he is stout, he is gray, he is, it almost feels like gravity is pulling him down. And his wife, she is drawn in such a way where there's circles and curves, and it's gentle, and it's
elegant.
She's elegant, and that is mirrored. I think this is one of the most beautiful things about this movie is it's mirrored in the house and the balloons, because the house is just this squat big thing, and the balloons lift it up, and those shapes are they're mirrored within the actual characters.
I have to ask, did you come up with that on your own, or did you read that somewhere? Because that is just because now I'm sitting here and I'm like, I wonder if that was intentional. I want to talk to the creators of the film. Here's another example from the same movie. The bad guy in the movie, what is he? He's a sharp, tall, angular character, and a lot of villains in movies are characterized that way, where there's just like sharp edges and just like no nonsense, basically.
And you see that in one of the movies that probably hardly anybody has ever seen. We may talk about it later on. Flow, you see some of those characters. You see the angles, the shapes. They reflect a little bit of what their personalities are all about. It's fascinating what these artists can do with these characters that live action just doesn't allow in a lot of ways.
Or I think maybe you can do it in live action, but you have to be really creative about how you do that,
Mm-hmm.
right? Certain shots, the cinematography, the lighting, the different things that go into it. I think it has to be very considered
Mm-hmm.
as well. I think you can communicate some things like that. But in animation, you literally have to do that, right? You're bringing something
Right.
from scratch,
Right.
right? So it's going to be considered, I think, in that way by its very nature.
As I say, if it's a live action movie, your only hope is to just cast Tim Curry as your villain and you're good to go.
Although I will say, we've seen actors in the past that have very particular looks, and so they get typecast in certain roles,
Oh, yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So I think there's a little bit of that in real life too.
It's interesting getting back to kind of these shapes and all that sort of stuff that goes into a movie that can be sort of embraced and these visual cues. In a live action movie, it is much harder, but within the context of fantasy or science fiction, you are allowed some of that freedom. I was just thinking as you were talking, Brett, about A New Hope. When you first see that spaceship, the opening scene, you have the Tantive 4, which is sort of curved and small, and it's relatable in a way. And then, of course, the Empire's ship is angular and sharp and huge,
Yep.
and everything you need to know really about the arc of the entire franchise from that one scene.
It tells you a lot. When Darth Vader walks in, there's no doubt he's the bad guy.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
a huge, imposing, dark figure. Like you have the fear of the Lord put in you by Darth Vader. Let me just say, no. And then of course, he's got the voice and everything and the chokehold. So like you becomes as a little kid, you are usually scared of Darth Vader. You're like, ooh, that is not a guy I want to mess with. And then
He was terrifying to me.
and then you and then you have, Emperor Palpatine, and he is just the quintessential, like, witch, essentially.
Yeah,
Like, if
yeah.
you think of an old, ugly, evil, warty witch, like, that is the Emperor, except in male form, but then you turn around and you have Princess Leia, and she's always wearing white, and this, she's just, like, this beautiful person, and then you have Luke, who's also, he's softer, he's still basically kind of, he's a
He
very
starts
young
out wearing
man.
white too.
Well,
Yeah.
and he's a very young man. He's still kind of a child, and then you have Han Solo, who's kind of like he's the rogue. He's the he's a smuggler, so he wears darker colors. To your point,
White and dark, actually, with the vest.
Yeah, he has both,
Yep.
exactly. And he's got the big furry sidekick, and but he's a little bit taller and he's a little bit rougher around the edges, but he's still like gentle. He's not, he's not choke holding people.
Sure. We get a sense that there might be some good in him, right? His
Yes.
best friend is essentially a dog, so we know
you
that
go.
he can't be
That's what it
be
is.
all bad, right?
So
So I've never heard Chewbacca described that way, but okay, I like it.
Chewbacca was based on a dog. Actually.
there you go.
Yeah.
There
Did
you
not
go.
know this.
So it's interesting as we're talking because one of the points of similarity that I'm seeing within these visual cues of these movies, I think that I'm a big fan of complexity in movies, ambiguity in movies. I love that, and I like not knowing necessarily who the good guy or the bad guy is, and those flips that can happen in movies that are sort of built for an older audience. But when I think about the truly quintessential family movies, there's a fairy tale quality. You know who the knight is. You know who the dragon is. And I think that's really resonant for kids who are trying to figure out their way in a very confusing world, to have that strong sense of good and bad. But I think we adults need it too. Just sort of that reminder that truth exists, good exists, that we need to be on that good side. And I think that fairy tale quality is what brings a lot of these family movies together.
I think that if we look over movies just kind of as a whole, I think there's a balance that's needed, right? Where, you talk about complexity in movies and characters having to make difficult choices and wrestle with things. Like, I think that's good. It's good. But when every movie we see has an anti-hero as the protagonist, right? It can be overdone. I think either way. So it's good to have that balance, and I like that you bring that up. So why do we keep returning to movies that our families enjoy, right? Is it just convenience? We know, hey, no one's going to argue about if we put on Monsters Inc., we're good. Or is there something deeper there to that?
Well, I think there's a couple of things. I think, yes, absolutely convenience. Like,
Doesn't hurt.
Well, and even in this day of streaming, like, people probably don't have like DVDs and VHSs and everything that we grew up with so much anymore, but you have your streaming services, and they're, if you know that this movie it's a Netflix original, so it's never going to leave Netflix and go to another streaming platform, and you're like, okay, I can just hit play and let this thing play as many times as they want, and I don't have to worry about it having, I don't have to worry about something cropping up that I wasn't expecting. You've already pre-approved this movie. You know it's safe. You're going to watch it over and over. You're going to let your kid watch it over and over because you already know it's safe. You don't have to think too much about it, So there is that convenience factor and nobody's going to argue factor. I think there's also, just touching back to what I said earlier, I think that there are certain movies that you're going to get more from them the more you watch them, the older you get. So you almost like, there might be a movie that you loved the first time you saw it as an adult, and you're like, okay, I really want my child to love this movie and appreciate it the way that I love and appreciate it. And they haven't quite reached, that age, that ripeness where they can truly understand all its themes,
Right.
I totally agree with that. And I think that there's also an element that one of the great joys of parenting is to be able to share the things that you loved as a child with your own kids.
Yep.
It becomes sort of this generational thing. And I also think that in the realm of family, the importance of ritual, I don't think can be overstated. Because I think ritual gives a sense of comfort, gives a sense of safety to kids there. They know that they're in a safe place because they have that familiarity.
Right.
And when you're talking about some of these very familiar movies, I don't know about you, but I think that I think my kids, when they would flip on, a favorite film, it would take you back to a certain place, a certain time. It would give you that feeling that, man, everything's going to be okay. And I think that that's one of the reasons why we come back to it.
I think for me, it was just a really connective experience with my family, right? Because you watch the movie, you have a blast, but then you quote the movie, right? Like I mentioned earlier, you're quoting the movie at all times, it seems, right? Or just a random moment, and you have that kind of bonded experience together as a family. If you enjoyed something, it's like a touchstone that you can return to and say like, oh, throw in a joke from the movie, everyone laughs. It's like that feels like a really connective piece too that I loved about family movies. So, and that could be really, even though we can overdo screen time for sure. Yeah. Especially nowadays these all seem like definitely potential benefits that could come from a family movie night. So as we kind of put a bow on this conversation, do either of you guys have family movie suggestions that maybe came out recently that we didn't cover in this podcast?
It's a great question.
We mentioned a lot of good ones.
Yeah, it's a great question. I do think that Inside Out is really a great film on a lot of different levels. I think that can be one that can be embraced by a whole bunch of people. But I also love the idea of being able to share some of the things that you loved as a kid with your own kids. Now, you have to be really careful about that because as we've mentioned on this show time and time again,
often movies that you don't remember that was in there.
You just look at it and you think, oh my goodness, can't show that. So be careful with that. Read the plugged in review if there is one. But I do think that there's a benefit, there's a joy in sharing those things with your kids.
So we've done a lot of talking about family movies today, but one family movie I would say that's come out that maybe our families have not seen, but maybe they should have, is a movie called Flow. It's gotten some Oscar buzz. Paul Asay has done a review. It's actually a Latvian movie that has no dialogue.
Yeah, it's kind of funny because it was up for, an Oscar in Best Foreign Language Movie, and it didn't have actually any language.
Any language.
At all. At all.
I mean, like, But that's a good thing because that means it's accessible to everyone. You don't have to watch with subtitles.
And that's exactly right.
So yeah, Paul, tell us about it. Tell us why it might be a good movie for families.
Yeah. Well, just to hook on kind of what you were talking about as far as no subtitles, of course, but it's also completely universal. Right, you're talking about you're communicating in movement. You're communicating in gesture, in color, in just sort of how the story flows, and that's one of the things that I think is really cool about it.
Can you give us like a summary of like what it's about, what happens, a little bit?
Yeah.
No spoilers, right?
No spoilers. No spoilers. And it really centers on this cat. This cat has been living by herself, for a good long while. For some reason, the area that she lives in is populated by cat statues. So naturally, she thinks that the world revolves around her. There are these tiny cat statues, big cat statues. There's this huge cat statue that looms over the entire valley in which she lives. Who carved them? We don't know. We never see a single human in this movie at all. But then one day, waters rush in, right? They just start pouring in. We have no idea why, but the land starts to flood, and you see these cat statues disappear one by one. And eventually, the cat is just standing on the very huge cat statue as the waters start to come up to the ears, essentially. And then the cat sees this boat start floating by. Cat wills itself to dive into the water, to swim to the boat, because it's the only thing that's going to be above water pretty soon. Climbs in and finds a capybara inside there. So, and really the whole thing sort of revolves around this boat and the creatures that wind up populating it. You have all these strange critters that just sort of find themselves on this floating sanctuary as the waters continue to go up, and they start just sailing through this very mysterious land filled with lots of ruins, but no humans to speak of. And it's really a very creatively told story.
Interesting. Okay, so a good movie for families, you'd say?
You don't have to worry about any bad language. That's for sure.
There you go. Would you say that it's a kid's movie, or is it suited for adults as well?
Well, I think it really is suited for both. This is, in some ways, this may be a little bit too artsy for little kids. It deals with lots of big emotions, right? It deals with some big themes. It talks about community. It talks about these characterizations that we find within these animals, the fight over leadership, the selfishness of just wanting to be by yourself. I love the cat because I sort of think about the cat as myself sometimes, where the cat tries so hard to get away from all of these animals, but finally, she sometimes sleeps on top of the actual mast, because, man, these animals are just so pesky. But then she discovers the beauty of community and the beauty of difference. And because of that, I don't think there are some really funny moments, and I think the kids can enjoy it, but it's also one that teens and adults, I think, could embrace as well.
Excellent. Any content issues that we should be aware of? Again, no bad language. So
no bad language. Nice. Now, there is some peril, and we do see some sadness. Like a lot of the best animated movies, I think that there's this bittersweet sense of loss that comes with it. And so you do see moments of peril. You do see a little bit of death. And those can be difficult points to navigate throughout the movie. Another really interesting thing is, the characters that we see here are not anthropomorphic. They act like animals for the most part. Even though we can see very human traits within them, you don't see like the typical Disney walking cat, walking dog type of thing. But within that context, so you don't have like a lot of spiritual musings, obviously. They're not going to be going into that. But there is a sense of spirituality that, that is worth probably considering before you go see it. I think they become like these talking points that you can sort of go through. They're very ambiguous. You don't know exactly what's going on, but there are some elements like that in this movie.
Okay. Well, sounds like a very interesting movie that families could check out. Thanks, Paul.
You bet.
Andor is back, and Star Wars fans have been invited to return to a galaxy far, far away. But it's not the starkly black and white good versus evil universe of the original trilogy that is waiting for us. This is Andor Season 2, which resides decidedly in the moral gray space in between.
That's a good way to put it.
So, what do families need to know about Andor? I'm joined by fellow Star Wars fanatics Paul Asay and Adam Holz to try to answer that question. Hey, guys.
Hey.
Hey, Brett.
Okay, so Andor has been called Star Wars for adults, right?
Right.
And it's certainly grittier than some of the other entries, I would say, in the epic space fantasy series. But is it better? And so let's start by talking about just from an entertainment and quality perspective. Is it better than some of the other entries in the Star Wars universe?
Why? Yes.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, like you say, this is Star Wars for adults. There are going to be some problems for a family viewing audience. It's grittier. There's more cursing potentially. There's more relationship issues that you have to worry about. But in terms of just the quality of the show, man, it is just certainly season 1 was incredibly strong. I will be quite honest. I loved season 1. It was really good.
Yeah, and it totally pains me to agree wholeheartedly.
It's the first time.
I am forced to do so, and I will take it. I have the higher ground, Paul.
We could do this all day.
We could do this all
day.
I have a bad feeling about this. Yeah. Okay.
There you go.
I swear it's not scripted. So I think for my money, and I guess I do have a Disney Plus subscription, so it is my money. I think this is by far the best thing we've seen from Disney Plus, season 1 anyway. And Paul, you're gonna lead us into season 2, and I say that because it's one of the few recent Star Wars entries, and frankly, I would go back to the prequels and include that, where both the story and the characters are incredibly compelling. And at least in the first season, even though it felt like 3 totally different storylines by the time you got to the end of the first season, it just was incredibly coherent. And it fleshed out the Star Wars universe in a way that we haven't seen before.
I would agree with that. So we'll all be pained agreeing with Paul because I loved it too. I really just really agree with everything you said, Adam. And just in terms of, we talk about Star Wars for adults and what does that mean? It's not just, I would say, more maybe problematic content, more cursing, maybe more suggestive material, but it's like the thematic content as well, right? It deals with kind of this burgeoning rebellion. Like there are no Jedi to be found, at least in season 1. It's all about kind of the regular people that exist in the Star Wars universe, and how does a rebellion form?
It is really it delves into the politics. It delves into the socioeconomic issues that are in play. And I really do think that when you're talking about Andor, pulling back away from the Force, if you will, it really does amp up so much of the narrative possibilities. You know, there's so many people you would think within this galaxy that have never ever seen a Jedi. They've never seen a chokehold. This is the reality that they live in. And I really love the other thing about it is that for kids, it could feel a little slow. Right? Because of all of these behind the scenes machinations that take place.
There's a lot of character development. It really takes its time in building up the characters.
Yeah. So I really think that all of that makes it you really are drawn into the story by that. But it is something that requires you to actually sit down and think. You're not going to be wowed by special effects.
Well, and I would say one of the main ways that we can understand how it's different is it feels like a totally different genre of story. And what I mean by that is clearly we're still in the realm of Star Wars, But as I was watching the first season, there's a whole, segment of episodes. There's a whole bunch of episodes that feel like a heist movie. And there are other points where it feels like a political thriller and other points where it feels like a spy movie. And so the science fiction-y aspects with, occasional action moment exceptions really take a backseat to totally different genres of storytelling that we haven't seen. And as you said, Brett, it is as gray as Star Wars is black and white.
Yes.
One of the most compelling scenes, or one of the most compelling story arcs in the first season, was, I think, when we find some of the characters in jail. One of the main characters in jail, and it's this prison scene, and that may have been one of the most gripping storylines that I've seen in the world of television for the last few years.
Plus Gollum was there.
Plus
and that was awesome.
was there, and he was great.
He was great.
Andy Serkis, he was a starring member in that, and it was really great.
Yeah, it almost was like they fit 4 different seasons of television into one in some ways, in the different story arcs. And so even though they did take their time with the character development piece, a lot happened in season 1, certainly. So as you mentioned, Adam, Andor's definitely settled into kind of that hazy area on the continuum between what we would know as the light side and the dark side of the Force, right? It's all in between. At times we see Andor himself, the main character, and our heroes not acting super heroically,
Right.
I would say.
Right.
And while the bad guys at times I think can sound pretty reasonable in terms of, well, we need to make sure there's order and all this stuff. So they lean into some of that. The bad guys are still the bad guys, for sure.
Bad guys are still bad guys.
It's still the Empire, but it's much more depth than I think we've seen from that side of things before. So we've talked maybe a little bit about the benefits of that approach, the character development, how things moved along, and we could still talk some more about that. But what are some of the maybe content concerns that just arise from that storytelling approach just naturally?
So I think that what we see in seasons 1 and in 2, what I've seen of season 2, you're going to have a little bit more issue with profanity, right? One of the very first words we hear on screen in the first episode, is a pretty strong profanity. So this definitely pushes into, I would say, PG-13 territory at times. You also have some relationship issues that you're going to have to worry about. In season 1, you saw a same-sex relationship take place. One of the characters is still back in this particular new season. There is a big theme of this essentially underage character getting married off, in an arranged marriage. So that can cause a few issues. That marriage that wedding is actually a central point in the beginning of season 2. So you do have some elements that you have to walk through, and the violence, it is ramped up a little bit as well. So occasionally and granted, Star Wars, you've always seen arms fly at times, but it does get a little bit more extreme, a little bit more bloody. And as you say, I think that when we see sometimes the good guys, quote unquote good guys, taking some pretty extreme steps, it can be harder to watch.
I think there's definitely a sense of really resisting a totalitarian government. Like, we actually see, what does totalitarianism look like in action? And I remember in one of the episodes early on in season 1, these stormtroopers show up and they're just filthy. And to me, that was emblematic of how this is different than anything else we've seen in Star Wars, because stormtroopers are never dirty, right? I mean, they're
pristine,
but they were
white,
covered
clean.
with grime, and it's like, oh, we're in the backwater mud hole zone here, where normal people are getting trampled underfoot by the Emperor's tyranny. And we see what that looks like in the political outworking of that. So it just has a totally different vibe. It's not, Star Wars has been characterized as space opera, which is a subgenre of science fiction that we don't really worry about the science part very much. We're just going to have fun with spaceships.
Yeah, space fantasy.
This is not space opera.
Yeah.
This is a totally different thing.
It is very gritty. And one thing to sort of go on with what you're talking about, Adam, the Andor takes place before the events of the original Star Wars,
Yeah,
New Hope.
New
It's the season 2, for instance, starts about 4 years before. And so
critically before Rogue One, as you
before
might imagine.
Rogue One, and you have these elements where you're talking about the grit and the grime, in the gray that we find here. It's at a time when sometimes the ethics of all this are being shuffled in, right? I think that the average ordinary person in the galaxy might be thinking about, am I able to feed my family? Can I deal with a little bit of hardship to deal with that? That's some totalitarianism. So we see even within some high level meetings within the Empire, these people sort of feigning sympathy or feigning justice, and that it's sort of an inside joke even there, but they're very aware that they're not only fighting for the galaxy, in a physical sense, they're fighting a PR war as well.
I think
and I don't have his name right in front of me, but one of the Skarsgård guys is in this, right? And
correct.
When a Skarsgård shows up, you're in indie movie territory.
Stellan Skarsgård.
Stellan.
Yeah.
That's who I thought it was.
Yeah, he plays
But
Luthen,
the interesting
right?
thing is we see him making all sorts of really, really hard ethical decisions. And at times, at least in the first season, we see that he had to choose between the lesser of two evils. And that might mean really sacrificing allies for the sake of the bigger cause. And I think that was part of the genius of the first season, was just unpacking that ethical complexity. It almost felt like, if you were Dietrich Bonhoeffer and you had a chance to kill Hitler, would you do it, right? No, and I don't want to overstate it, but you get this sense of, wow, sometimes to try to do the right thing, people feel like they have to do some really horrible things.
Right, getting into that murky gray area.
Yeah, and just to emphasize that, the other really compelling character I find, in some ways, Cassian Andor is the least compelling character in Andor. Because Luthen is super compelling in that he is.
And that's Stellan Skarsgård's character.
Correct,
right?
correct. He is essentially this secret operative who's working for the Empire, where he's sort of masquerading as an antiques dealer.
We're for the rebellion.
For the rebellion. Yeah, did I say the Empire? Sorry. But the other really character that I love watching is Mon Mothma.
Yeah,
Oh, she's great.
me too.
She is fantastic. She is this political operative. She is a senator. She is incredibly wealthy. She smiles at all the right people. She's full of grace and charm, and secretly she's funding the Empire. And so you have a couple of
the
really
rebellion. Maybe Paul is working
full
for the
of grace and
Empire.
charm.
He's spreading a disinformation campaign against the rebellion.
And we see in season 2 some really compelling scenes actually between Luthen and Mon Mothma as they sort of are dealing with these murky moral complexities and what to do with a particular, I will not spoil it, but a particularly delicate situation.
Well, we've touched on it, but I mean, really the fact that Andor focuses on just, hey, what would you do? What would you be willing to do to overthrow tyranny, right? And chase after that goal. It leads characters in a lot of interesting places. And I think because Andor does take the time to develop the characters and the relationships. You mentioned the wedding element of that. That actually was kind of set up in season 1, Mon Mothma's daughter. And so Mon Mothma is kind of faced with a choice of, okay, I can cover up my activities and still continue supporting the rebellion, but I kind of have to sacrifice my child in some ways to do this.
And you know that it's killing her.
You know that it's killing her, but the choice is still, at least by the end of season 1, you see that it's still moving forward. So, Paul, since you are plugged in, chosen one, and you have seen season 2 of Andor, some of the episodes at least, can you just kind of set the stage for us? Tell us, like, where do we start? Where are things kind of starting at in season 2?
You bet. Season 2, by the way, season 2 is going to be constructed a little bit different than season 1. Season 1 was really one big narrative in one particular season of time, right? Season 2 is going to be separated where it's going to lead us directly into Rogue One year by year. So 3 episodes, it's a 12-episode season. From what I understand, every 3 episodes will be a self-contained year where we see the story move along.
Interesting.
Which is an interesting, somewhat confusing choice. I'm not sure how I feel about that, but as the season launches, we are 4 years away from the events of Rogue One and A New Hope. Mon Mothma's daughter is getting married, and it's a lavish, huge wedding, which brings together a lot of Imperial power brokers, but also some secret rebel operatives as well. So you see sort of a confluence of some interesting tensions within that wedding atmosphere. Meanwhile, Cassian Andor is actually stealing an Empire TIE fighter, like one of those really cool interceptors. You know, it's essentially like Darth Vader's
twin
TIE
ion engine.
He's super cool. It's great, but he doesn't know how to fly it. And so there's a little bit of comedy there. It's crashing all over, but he winds up taking the ship but the place that he was going to meet another rebel operative, the rebel operative has apparently been killed by other rebels who didn't quite trust him, and these rebels are crazy. They take him captive, and then it's up to Cassian to try to get out.
Okay.
So that's kind of the setup for what we're looking at.
So I mean, it feels akin to season 1, where you even have rebels within rebels, different factions going after each other.
This rebel clan is a mess. It is a mess.
All right, so we still need to answer the question. I think we've touched on it, but is Andor right for families? I think what we'll talk about is, what do you think is kind of the general age range? Obviously, every child is different. Every family is different with what they like to watch or what they can handle. But what would you say is kind of the youngest that you would recommend families to pop on Andor and watch it together? Because even though there's some things aren't explicit even, but there are certainly other things that are hinted at that could raise questions. I mean, season 1 started in a brothel.
Yes.
No joke.
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah. And you don't have one of those elements, at least in the first couple of episodes that I've seen. But at the same time, because of the grit, because of the grind factor, because I wouldn't say that the content that we see is overwhelming, but it is there. And because it comes in so infrequently, in some ways it feels a little bit stronger, combined with the grime. Akin to a superhero movie. So if you are taking your kids to an MCU movie, a Marvel Cinematic Universe superhero movie, probably Andor is okay for your kids. If they're not at that age yet, I'd probably wait on Andor.
what do you think, Adam?
Well, I would agree with that. I would say 12 or 13, and I think the interesting thing is I'm just not sure that most kids are going to be that interested in sitting through the character development. Like, as an adult and somebody who's been immersed in the Star Wars world for the last 50 years practically, I love the backstory, right? If you are emotionally invested in the Star Wars universe, you're going to love, I think, what they do with these characters. But really slow, creeping, thriller-style character development is not something your average 12 or 13-year-old, unless they're kind of precocious or really like drama. I just don't think they're going to be that interested in it. They're going to be bored.
Well, and to emphasize that, I do think that when we look at season 1, I mean, there were whole episodes that you never got outside. I mean, it was just
nothing really happened other than that character development,
which I loved. I loved
me too.
that.
I loved it.
I did too. There's a lot of action in that, so to speak, but not traditionally as we would understand it.
If I'm 9, I'm going to want to see lightsabers. I'm going to want to see blasters. I'm going to want to see Sarlaccs swallowing people,
Right. Even if they do retcon it and it turns out Boba Fett crawled out the other end and it was all okay for him.
It's all okay.
It's just not, come on.
Don't show your bitterness, Adam.
Yeah, that maybe is maybe a less widely appreciated side of the Disney Star Wars experience.
Book of Boba Fett.
So I guess to kind of put a bow on that, you said earlier, Paul, like PG-13. That's kind of the realm that we're looking at here. This is not R-rated Star Wars by any means, but this is kind of where we're seeing PG-13 be right now as well. So families should be aware of that. So wrapping up, is this? Well, I think we'd all agree that this is the best, at least amongst ourselves, that this is the best thing Disney Star Wars has made.
At least season 1.
But okay, at least season 1. But where does this rank within the wider Star Wars universe?
Oh,
for
you're
you
going to ask us to get really geeky
Yes.
here. Okay,
Oh, yeah.
Adam, you go.
You don't have to rank everything out, but just give us an idea.
So-
where it
Rank
ranks.
everything. We have so much time.
I for my money, and I will take tremendous heat for what I'm about to say. Rogue One is my second favorite Star Wars movie after Star Wars.
Which
Wow.
is ludicrous.
No, I know. All of the purists are like, Empire Strikes Back is the best. Like, whatever. The Dagobah stuff is so boring.
Shots
and the
fired.
cliffhanger wrecks it. In terms of just being emotionally satisfying, Rogue One is amazing, and this feels like the prequel to Rogue One. So I think in terms of storytelling, it is right up there near the very top of my Star Wars experience. I was blown away by Andor, the first season. It massively exceeded my expectations, and I think it's safe to say for most Star Wars fans, there hasn't been a lot that has massively exceeded anyone's expectations.
It's been a while.
The original trilogy. It's been a while, right?
So I thought Rogue One was just fine. I think Andor is far superior to Rogue One.
Yeah, and I would agree with that, actually.
I would say that in terms of the entire Star Wars canon that I'm familiar with, I would rank Andor as it's very different from the original movies that we all love. You know, A New Hope, Empire Strikes Back, which was definitely better than Rogue One. I do think The Mandalorian season 1 was really super strong. I really liked the beginning of
It was very good.
Mandalorian. But I would say, I would probably say Andor would rank probably 3rd or 4th. It would definitely make my top 5 in terms of Star Wars products.
And I think for me, honestly, it's the original trilogy, and then it's Andor. Mm-hmm. And I would agree with you. Like, it feels different than the original
I know
trilogy.
you like your Ewoks.
Return of the Jedi, underrated. Empire Strikes Back is the best, for sure. But I think Andor
You
does...
guys are just walking in lockstep with all those people that have said it for so long that you've lost the ability to think critically.
Sometimes,
about
sometimes the
goodness.
popular opinion
Golly.
is true, right?
it. Star Wars is better.
Yeah, but I like Andor a lot. I think it actually, especially if you grew up with the original trilogy, it's different than the original trilogy. That
Very different.
that hero's journey and the light versus dark and everything. But I think Andor actually kind of can undergird that in some ways. So
And I know you're trying to wrap this up, but I did want to add something to this
And another
because
thing.
because that's one of the beauties of the Star Wars universe is that it is a universe and it allows us to tell so many different stories. Sometimes the problem with the Star Wars universe as it is now is a lot of the stories feel very much the same. Andor tells us a new and different story in a new and different way, and I so appreciate
with,
that.
I guess, a familiar character, since Andor was in Rogue One, but not like necessarily a classic character, and it introduces a lot of new characters.
Turns out
in it
he's
as
actually
well.
a Skywalker.
You're
Oh,
right.
snap.
Oh man, let's hope not. Let's hope that's not the end of season 2, right? All right. Well, on that note, I think we'll wrap up our conversation. But Andor season 2, it's out on Disney Plus now. Let us know what you think about it. Is your family planning on watching it? And what do you think? What is your favorite Star Wars entry in the galaxy far, far away? So, all right, we'll wrap up. Thanks, Paul. Thanks, Adam. All right, guys, it's game time.
Yay!
This time around, we're going to do an old favorite. It's Name That Movie, but it's going to be Family Movie Edition.
Family movie edition.
Yes. So what do you got? Paul, we'll start with you.
Oh my goodness, why did you start with me? Okay, here we go. A seemingly unremarkable girl ends up being the only person who can save her remarkable house and her remarkable family.
Encanto.
That'd be my guess as well.
You got it.
All
That was
right.
way too easy.
Excellent job,
I
Emily.
should have
Yes,
made it
shame on
harder.
you, Paul.
I should have just ended it with a seemingly unremarkable girl does stuff.
Does stuff.
Does stuff. That would have been
That
a
would have
little
been
bit-
harder.
We would have been asking for more details. Come on.
I was hoping I was going to be able to sing a few songs from the movie. I'm very disappointed.
No.
A person does things.
A person does
And
things.
things happen.
Now you guess.
movie.
And it's a family movie.
All right,
There you
Emily.
go.
How about you?
All right. When two parents each get their dream jobs, they have to uproot their family and move to a city.
Inside Out, no.
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 All right.
Two
Just
parents.
one. Two parents.
Get their dream jobs.
Two parents get their dream jobs.
Yeah.
It's not Star Wars. I'm just saying.
Yeah, probably not.
Do we need more info?
Give us one more hint.
Okay. One of their children is so traumatized by this move that he runs away and goes back to their old home.
Oh,
But it's okay. Do you think you know it?
No, I don't.
But it's okay because they're able to find him because they have so many children of their own to go looking for him.
Oh my goodness! Why do I
You
not
know
know
it.
this?
You both know it.
Yeah.
You're just
This
like,
is-
what is this movie?
So
This is
many
clicking.
children.
Oh man.
It's not 101 Dalmatians.
No, I
The
think
eldest daughter has a boyfriend that the younger children hate, so they torture him essentially.
Oh my gosh, I'm gonna be kicking myself because this is all sounding so familiar. You stumped me.
Okay.
Steve Martin, Bonnie Hunt, Ashton Kutcher, Piper Parabo, or however you say
That's
her name.
right.
might be.
What is it?
Parabo.
It's like
Hillary Duff, Tom Welling.
I can't think of the name of it.
Cheaper
It's
by
like,
the dozen.
Cheaper by the dozen. All I could think of in my head was the number 12.
Our producer,
at least
Ashley, had it.
At least I had the number 12. 12?
So, in fairness to me, I have
Wow.
never seen that movie.
That's
Okay.
a good movie. That's
Yeah,
a really
that was
good
one of the
movie.
ones I watched a lot as a kid.
Yeah.
Hillary
yeah, I remember
Duff.
seeing that.
And funnily enough, so there are 3 versions of that. There's the real original, which was like, I think it came out in the 70s or so. I've never seen that one. Then there's this one with Bonnie Hunt and Steve Martin, which is, the only one I know. So to me, that's the correct version.
That's the correct version. Yes.
And then they also made another one recently that I think had Zach Braff in it. And I don't remember who else, but I never saw that one either. So
There is only
read the
one
reviews
official version.
of these movies
Yeah.
before you see them. But that one, the one with Bonnie Hunt and Steve Martin, was my favorite growing up.
I can't believe
watched
that.
too. I remember enjoying that.
Yeah, I can't imagine that Bonnie Hunt gets top billing for you over Steve Martin.
No, Bonnie Hunt is like one of my favorite actresses.
Really?
What are you talking
That's
about?
Steve Martin.
I
He's just
love Bonnie
hilarious.
Hunt. I wanted her to be my mom. Because she played the mom in so many movies. And I was just, I didn't actually want her to be my mom. I wanted her to be my movie mom. Like if
Yeah.
in a movie about my life, I wanted Bonnie Hunt to be my mom.
Yeah, I get that. I get that.
All right, that's great. Okay, here's mine. 3 household pets brave the rocky, mountainous wilderness to find
Homeward
their
Bound.
way home to their owners. Emily got it.
I think I won.
Homeward Bound.
I think
I
you
got
won.
both of
You
yours.
stumped us and
I stumped you
yeah.
with mine. That's a perfect score.
That is.
Now I'm
well
bitter.
done.
I'm bitter now.
Yeah.
That seems unfair.
Homeward Bound. Have you seen Homeward Bound, Paul?
I have seen Homeward
Yeah.
Bound.
Love
Yeah, yeah, it's a good movie,
was a
and
good one.
I was going to let you finish your question. I didn't want to interrupt you, but no.
Wow.
Someone's
You're rude.
Someone's a sore loser. So. All right. We'll wrap up the game there. Thanks for the game. Thanks for the conversation, guys. Appreciate it. And a special thanks to all you listeners out there for listening. We couldn't do what we do without your support. So we'd love to hear from you. What's your favorite movie to watch with your family? How has it brought you together? Let us know through our plugged-in social channels. That's YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, or send us an email at team@thepluggedinshow.com. Thanks again for joining us. We'll see you next time on The Plugged In Show.